Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling a really complex story. It's about the Marcos family's wealth, their influence, and, all those international connections.
Yeah, it's a lot to unpack. We've got investigative reports, government records, news analysis. Yeah. Quite a stack of material.
Right. And our mission here, for you listening, is to pull out the key insights, the really important stuff, without getting totally overwhelmed by all the details.
Exactly. Think of it as your direct path to understanding the core issues. We're talking offshore billions, political impact, global ties, the whole picture.
We'll cover the alleged offshore money, how it might fuel politics, those international relationships, the family's power base, legal fights, recovery efforts. It's quite the list.
It really is. Let's just dive in.
Okay, let's start with the scale of this offshore wealth. The numbers flying around are just huge.
Yeah, estimates are what, $5 to $10 billion? Some even push it way higher, maybe up to $30 billion.
30 billion. And it's supposedly spread out, right? Switzerland, Singapore, BVI, even the U.S.
That's the picture painted by various sources, yes. And look, the existence of significant offshore wealth isn't really in dispute thanks to bodies like the PCGG.
The Presidential Commission on Good Government, they've been at this since '86.
Exactly. And they've recovered something like $4 billion over the decades.
Which sounds like a lot, but...
But they estimate maybe $10 billion more is still out there, unrecovered. They're still digging into things like the Sintra Trust in the BVI.
So $4 billion recovered, $10 billion still potentially missing. It just shows how hard this is. It points to a really sophisticated setup to hide things, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It suggests a system designed for secrecy, designed to resist recovery efforts.
And then you had those big leaks, the Panama Papers, Paradise Papers, the ICIJ work.
Right, the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists. That really added fuel to the fire, didn't it?
Yeah, it linked the family to shell companies, properties. I think New York and London were mentioned.
Precisely. Specific entities, specific assets. It gave concrete examples to back up the broader allegations.
And this wasn't just journalists. There was a U.S. court case, too.
Back in 1995, a Hawaii jury found the Marcos estate liable. $2 billion for human rights victims.
Wow.
And the verdict basically confirmed, legally speaking, that systematic looting had happened.
So, okay, bottom line. There's definitely significant offshore wealth. The exact amount is fuzzy because of all the secrecy, but it's there.
That seems to be the clear takeaway from all these sources, yeah.
Which brings us to the next big question. How could wealth like that be used? Politically, I mean, it's not like you just, withdraw cash for rallies.
Right. How does hidden money translate into actual political power? It's not always a straight line you can draw with evidence.
But there are patterns, things that make you wonder.
Definitely. Think about the social media stuff. Between, say, 2019 and 2022, there's this huge push.
The rebranding efforts, trying to paint a different picture of the Marcos years.
Exactly. Stanford researchers, Rappler, they documented these really coordinated disinformation campaigns. Whitewashing history, basically.
And that kind of sustained, sophisticated campaign, that costs money. Serious money.
It absolutely does. And the funding sources were opaque, let's say.
Then there was the 2022 election itself, Marcos Jr.'s campaign spending.
The Philippine Center for Investigative Journalism, PCIJ, they looked into that.
And found what?
Well, they reported that the spending on digital ads, just the ads, seemed way higher than what the campaign officially declared.
Which immediately raises flags. Where'd the extra money come from? Offshore funds.
That's the suspicion, yes. It's hard to prove definitively, but the question hangs there. Undeclared resources funding campaign activities.
And it's not just campaigns, is it? What about the legal side?
But that's another angle. Look at Imelda Marcos' 2018 graft conviction. It got overturned.
Right, I remember that. And there were allegations afterward. Judicial interference.
Those allegations were certainly made. And, hiring top-tier lawyers for these complex, high-stakes cases, that's incredibly expensive.
So the suggestion is maybe hidden wealth helps pay for those high-powered legal teams, helps navigate the justice system.
It's a plausible connection people make, yeah. Again, proving it is the hard part, but the potential is there. Access to funds could smooth the way legally.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit. International relations. Marcos Jr. seems to have tilted much more towards the U.S.
He definitely has. A noticeable pro-U.S. pivot in foreign policy.
So could that shift be connected to protecting the family assets abroad? Is that part of the calculation?
Well, it's possible, but linking it directly is speculative. There are clear geopolitical reasons for the shift, too.
Like the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, EDCA, expanding that with the U.S. in 2023.
Exactly. That's a big strategic move. It aligns the Philippines more closely with the U.S. security umbrella, especially with rising tensions with China in the South China Sea.
So the EDCA expansion serves strategic goals, regardless of any asset protection ideas.
Pretty much, it reflects the regional dynamics. But, having good relations with a country where assets might be held, it probably doesn't hurt.
But hang on, didn't the U.S. hit Marcos Jr. with that huge contempt order, $353 million?
They did, yeah. Back in 2020, it was for refusing to cooperate and compensating those human rights victims from the Hawaii case.
So being friendly with the U.S. doesn't seem to automatically shield him from legal action over there?
That's a really crucial point. Diplomacy might soften the edges, maybe affect enforcement, but the U.S. legal system has its own momentum. That contempt order is still there.
It shows that closer ties don't equal a free pass, legally speaking.
Precisely. And then there's the Maharlika Investment Fund. That's sovereign wealth fund.
Right. There's been some criticism, hasn't there? Concerns about how it might be managed.
Yes. Groups like Transparency International have raised red flags. They point to potential risks, drawing parallels with scandals like 1MDB in Malaysia.
But is there any proven link between the Marcos family and potential misuse of that fund?
No, not directly proven. The concerns are more about the structure and potential vulnerabilities to misuse in general, rather than specific evidence implicating the family at this stage.
Okay, let's bring it back home, domestically. Ilocos Norte, that seems to be the family's stronghold.
It absolutely is. It's their traditional power base.
And the family holds key positions there, right? Ime Marcos as senator, her son as governor.
That's right. Matthew Manitoc is governor. The election results consistently favor them there. And you do hear reports from opposition figures about intimidation or pressure. It suggests a very solid grip on local power.
And the PCGG, didn't they mention issues in Ilocos Norte specifically, corruption?
They did. Past PCGG reports have talked about systematic corruption in the province, including allegations about misuse of tobacco excise tax fund.
So, again, while you can't draw a direct dotted line from a specific offshore account to, say, funding local patronage, the dynastic control is undeniable.
The control is evident, yes. Whether offshore funds directly fuel that local dominance is more circumstantial, based on the patterns we see.
And actually recovering any of this alleged ill-gotten wealth, it sounds incredibly tough.
Oh, it is. Hugely challenging. Why is that? What are the main roadblocks?
Well, think about where a lot of this money is supposedly hidden. Singapore. The British Virgin Islands.
Places known for financial secrecy.
Exactly. The ICIJ reporting highlighted this. Their laws make it really difficult to trace assets. The Sinter Trust case is a good example of how complex it gets.
So, international laws and banking secrecy are major hurdles.
Huge hurdles. And then there's the domestic side. The PCGG itself has said that political interference hampers their work.
Interference? Like what?
Well, they've cited things like budget cuts under the current Marcos Jr. administration as an obstacle to their recovery efforts.
So you have international financial secrecy and potential political roadblocks at home. It's a double whammy against recovery.
Pretty much. It makes achieving full accountability very, very difficult.
Let's broaden out again to Marcos Jr.'s international posture. We talked U.S., but what about the bigger picture? How is he positioning the Philippines globally?
It's definitely a multi-pronged approach. The deepened ties with the U.S. and other Western allies are clear. Military partnerships, economic initiatives like friendshoring, and taking a tougher line on the South China Sea disputes.
Right. Asserting Philippine claims more forcefully. This aligns them with Western partners, but also, carries risks. It potentially draws them deeper into the U.S.-China rivalry.
What about the relationship with China, then? It can't be all confrontation, surely. There's still trade, economics.
It's a balancing act, absolutely.
Yeah.
A harder line on maritime sovereignty, yes, but economic pragmatism is still essential.
So, talking tough, but keeping channels open.
Kind of. Interestingly, the big wave of Chinese investment that was maybe anticipated under the previous administration hasn't really materialized in the way some expected. So, the current approach seems more cautious, balancing sovereignty claims with economic needs.
And the human rights issue. That always looms large, especially internationally, the ICC investigation into the Duterte drug war.
That's a persistent point of friction. The official stance is non-cooperation with the International Criminal Court.
Which doesn't play well with some international partners.
Not particularly, especially Western nations that emphasize human rights accountability. However, it's also noted that the government hasn't been actively, say, blocking ICC investigators from doing their work when they come.
So a nuanced position. Defending sovereignty, but maybe not completely shutting the door.
It seems like an attempt to manage the situation, yeah. It's also a very polarizing issue domestically, of course.
Okay. Economics. The administration talks about becoming a trillion-dollar economy. Big goal. How do international relations play into that?
Investor confidence is key, isn't it? You need foreign direct investment, donor support.
And stability helps. Having continuity in finance and trade ministries, that's probably seen as a positive signal.
True. But then you get criticisms about budget priorities, concerns about pork barrel spending, cuts to social services.
And that kind of thing could make international donors or investors nervous, affect those big economic goals.
It potentially could, yes. Achieving ambitious targets requires demonstrating good governance and transparency, not just stability. Confidence can be fragile.
And lastly, on the domestic front, there seems to be this growing tension. The Marcos camp versus the Duterte camp.
Yes, that rift seems quite real and is becoming more public.
Impeachment moves against Vice President Sara Duterte, accusations flying back and forth.
Exactly. Allegations of political maneuvering, plotting. It introduces an element of political instability.
Which could have international ripple effects on investor confidence, maybe perceptions of stability.
Absolutely. Internal political friction can definitely impact how the Philippines is viewed internationally as a reliable partner or investment destination. The 2025 midterms showed Marcos' allies doing well, but also revealed some potential vulnerabilities. Public opinion is still a factor.
Okay, let's try to pull some threads together. Based on everything we've looked at, how could this offshore wealth actually be used for political ends? What are the mechanisms?
Well, there's a history here, right? We know about structures like the Sintra Trust, the M Trust.
Yeah.
Linked to Jaime Marcos, BVI, Malaysia, Switzerland, Singapore.
Using offshore jurisdictions known for secrecy, managed by foreign advisors.
Exactly. It's a way to hold and potentially move large sums of money without much public scrutiny. That's the basic mechanism.
And then that money could, theoretically, fund things like those big social media campaigns we talked about, or help cement alliances?
Plausibly, yes. Funding the Golden Age narrative, perhaps providing financial incentives to political allies, like, say, the Dutertes initially, maintaining that local power base in Ilocos Norte through patronage.
Patronage meaning funding local projects, helping supporters.
Yeah, essentially keeping the machinery well-oiled. All these activities cost significant money, and offshore reserves offer a potential deniable source.
And it could also help when facing legal troubles.
That's another potential use. We know the PCGG is still investigating, still trying to recover assets. There have been many legal battles over the years.
And avoiding convictions, delaying cases, that takes resources. Legal fees, maybe other means.
Precisely. Access to substantial, untraceable funds could be a major advantage in navigating the legal system, funding defenses, perhaps even influencing outcomes, though that's harder to prove. The fact that billions remain unrecovered speaks volumes.
So it's not just direct spending. Could there be more subtle economic leverage?
Potentially. Think about the known assets: global real estate, art, businesses. New York, Hawaii, Singapore.
Those assets can be monetized, right? Sold or leveraged.
Yes. And the proceeds could fund the political machine less directly, maybe supporting friendly businesses, financing candidates indirectly, creating networks of obligation. It's about building and maintaining influence.
It really paints a picture of a complex, multi-layered system of influence, funded potentially by hidden wealth, and incredibly hard to prove or dismantle.
That's the challenge. Jurisdictional secrecy, potential political interference, weakening recovery bodies like the PCGG, and just the sheer difficulty of tracing money through complex international systems, plus disinformation campaigns muddying the waters.
So let's wrap up by looking at this resurgence. The family back in power, the international connections now. What's the big picture?
Well, the striking thing is how the past connects to the present. That historical accumulation of wealth abroad, the ill-gotten wealth as it's often termed.
The New York properties, the Swiss accounts, the shell companies.
Right. All that laid the groundwork. It wasn't just wealth. It was a sophisticated global network. And a lot of that wealth, maybe $9.5 billion, according to some estimates, is likely still hidden offshore. Cayman Islands, Bahamas, places like that.
And now, fast forward to today, you see the diplomatic moves strengthening ties with the U.S. and the West.
Exactly. More U.S. military presence, participating in forums like Davos, it serves multiple purposes. Security, economic benefits, yes, but it could also be seen as potentially helping to safeguard assets held internationally, creating a more favorable environment.
Even though that U.S. contempt order is still hanging out there.
It is, which shows the limits of diplomacy against legal processes. It's not a magic shield.
And domestically, things like the Maharlika Fund or the First Lady's Pasig River Project, they have international angles too.
Sure. Maharlika raises those governance concerns we mentioned, which affects international perception. The River Project aims to attract tourism and investment, which is inherently international. Everything is interconnected.
And all this happens against the backdrop of those internal political shifts, like the Marcos Duterte tensions.
Right. That domestic dynamic adds another layer. The pro-Western tilt might even be partly a way to distance the administration from previous alignments or internal rivals. It's incredibly complex. History, money, global politics, domestic power plays. They're all tangled together.
Okay, so let's try to summarize this deep dive. What seems confirmed, what's plausible, and what might be overstated?
Well, confirmed seems to be the existence of substantial offshore wealth, historically accumulated. Also confirmed is the family's strong dynastic control in places like Ilocos Norte.
Plausible, but harder to definitively prove, is the idea that this offshore wealth directly funds current political operations campaigns, social media, legal defense's patronage. The patterns suggest it, but the direct money trail is often hidden.
Exactly. And maybe overstated, or at least more complex, is the claim that the sole reason for the pro-U.S. foreign policy pivot is asset protection. Geopolitics plays a huge role there, though asset protection could certainly be a contributing factor in the overall strategy.
And we have to keep stressing how difficult it is to get concrete proof linking specific funds to specific actions. That financial secrecy is a massive barrier.
It really is, which is why the ongoing work of the PCGG, investigative journalists, groups like ICIJ, it's absolutely crucial. They keep trying to pierce that veil of secrecy.
Okay, so on that note, here's a final thought for you, our listener, to chew on. Considering this complex web, the hidden money, the global connections, the domestic power, what do you think are the most significant long-term impacts for the Philippines' democracy, its institutions, and its place in the world?
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it? Something that will definitely keep evolving.
It certainly will. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.